as a parent, are you worried about the impact of excessive screen time on your kids, the impact of social media and gaming on your children? Then the book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation is the right book for you. Let's start with the hard truth. Parenting in 2025 is not easy. The rates of self harm, anxiety, and depression have skyrocketed amongst our children. For girls, especially, the impact is even worse. Just between 2011 and 2019, the rates of self harm have doubled. Boys are not immune either. The constant overstimulation and comparison has robbed them of their ability to feel connected with their peers and confident in themselves. And so, as a parent of an 11-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, the anxious generation was an eye opener because Haid not only talks about the statistics behind these problems, but he goes into the two main culprits that have led us to this situation. The first is what he calls safetyism, the overprotection and oversupervision that we're doing of our children. And the second is, of course, the exposure to smartphones and social media. Safetyism is we as parents being overly protective of our children and also trying to guide and direct every minute of their lives. Compare our children's childhood now with our own childhood back in the day. How much time did we get to play freely with our friends versus how much was directed by our parents? How many initiatives could we take as children versus how many initiatives do we allow our children to take? I remember being sent to buy groceries, to go to the neighborhood store and get a bike on rent, to go to the park by myself, often to go to friends' houses that were a few miles away at a walkable distance, all unsupervised. Today, we cannot imagine letting our children do that. Hate goes back to the 80s and 90s when the news cycle really burst and we were hearing all about everything that is possibly going wrong. So, while the real facts and statistics say that the rates of crime are constantly coming down, our perception is that crime is going up all the time. And so, we want always keep our kids under a watchful eye. When we restrict playtime for our children, we have to give them other means to keep themselves entertained. And as parents, we're all busy with our own work and our own lives. And so the easiest mechanism that becomes available to us is to give them a smartphone. And that's what's happened since 2011 that has led to these skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression and isolation in boys and girls. Now, he doesn't just talk about all of the statistics that drive home this point, but he also gives four essential tips for us as parents or teachers or schools or the community coming together that can help address this issue. Tip number one, no smartphones before high school. This is tough given peer pressure and given the fact that everybody around our kids is going to have smartphones. And Haidt talks about how important it is to sit with your kids and explain to them why it is that they're not going to get smartphones before the ninth grade. You can give them a simple phone for communication, for safety, etc. But you do not need to give them a smartphone. In fact, he talks about coming together as a community, creating a group of parents whose kids go to the same grade, and seeing if you can organize a consensus amongst them so that the peer pressure on your kids gets low. Tip number two, no social media before the age of 16. You can let them have a smartphone, but not let them create their own social media accounts. The constant self comparison, the constant fear of missing out, and the peer pressure is so high when kids go on social media, especially for girls, when they are on Instagram and TikTok, that it is absolutely not worth it. And so Haidt talks about restricting social media access before the age of 16, before their brains have developed to be able to filter the constant barrage of perfectionism that flows on these social media channels. The third aspect that he talks about is the concept of phone free schools. Not schools that say don't use the phone during class, but schools that say keep your phones in the locker and don't have your phones constantly with you, whether you're in class or you're playing with your friends or you're doing your classes or activities in school. That's a true phone free school. Studies have shown that even for us as adults, our productivity plummets just by the fact that we have a phone next to our workstation rather than in the other room. And the fourth tip, which my wife and I constantly disagree on, is allowing kids more unsupervised play. Hay talks about the fact that over the last few decades, even in schools, kids now get lesser playtime and more time in class. And similarly, when they come home, we keep them constantly occupied with a series of classes and not let them do what we did as children, which is just go out to a park or go and meet our friends, figure out what game we are going to play, even invent the rules of the game, resolve our own conflicts, and figure out how to become better socially on our own. And I think that's really the part that we are missing out on as far as our kids are concerned. So, here are some of the things that we find useful to keep our kids away from screen. One is my wife and I, we both agree on the impact of screen time and social media for kids. So, we both consciously try and use as less of the phone, stay as less on screens as we can when kids are around. Second, we push them towards activities that will keep them occupied for longer amounts of time. Obviously, all of us in the family love to read. So today we'll spend maybe a couple of hours at the town library. Maybe we'll start a new jigsaw puzzle together. We will keep them occupied with household chores. My kids may run across the road to their neighbor's house and find if they're around, those kids are around and play with them. They'll obviously spend an hour or so reading. Maybe we'll make them study as well over the weekend. And a couple of hours spent at the park, and that's the day done. And you're ready for dinner. So if all of this feels overwhelming at this point, Haidt gives a few practical tips to start small. First is to sit down as a family and talk about it. Like when we came to the US, we started talking about the impact of processed food and high sugar food to our children. The same we can do when it comes to screen time. Another easy thing is to start by a few hours of the day when everyone in the family stays off the screen. In fact, you could extend it to a tech free weekend. Another idea is to talk to other parents and create a bit of a community around this problem because it is a huge problem and it's worth fighting to make our kids more self reliant and less anxious. And remember, kids learn not by what we tell them to do or not do, but by how we behave. So the less screen time we spend ourselves is what's going to help our kids stay away from their own screens. And in the next video, I'm going to tell you about practical tips to reduce your own doom scrolling and excessive over reliance on social media.